Time to now give Benedict Arnold his due. Let's sketch him out. Let's do a little bit of a mini biography of Benedict Arnold because he's going to play a huge role in this second battle, Bemis Heights. Benedict Arnold was born to a prominent Connecticut family, but unfortunately his father was an alcoholic and he squandered the family's fortune. So Arnold grew up, I'm not going to say in dire poverty, but he certainly was not anywhere near wealthy. When Benedict Arnold was 16, he joined a militia force that participated in the French and Indian War. He achieved great success later through the shipping business. And then when the Revolutionary War broke out, he became a captain. He formed his own company. Later, he was appointed a colonel in the Massachusetts militia. And as we've seen already, he's already done a lot of stuff. He's like the U.S. Army. He does more before 9 a.m. than most people do all day. Right? You remember that slogan?
Yes.
Some of our older listeners may remember that. But so again, let's just recount what Arnold has done just in the Revolutionary War up to now. He helped capture Fort Ticonderoga in 1775. By the way, he spent a great deal of his own money, and a lot of that never got paid back by the government. And that's one reason he's kind of got this chip on his shoulder that's getting bigger and bigger as the war progresses. Then he led the attack on Quebec in 1775 and 1776, which came so close to being successful, but it just didn't quite make it. And he was injured in that one, seriously injured in the leg. And then we saw he had stopped the force of Colonel Barry St. Leger from coming over and reinforcing Burgoyne earlier in 1777. So Arnold had really had an impressive resume up to this point, both in business as well as in war. And he felt he was really owed a lot. He felt he deserved a lot of credit. He was egotistical. He had a mercurial temper, so he could go from just furious to calm and then to happy and then to angry. And he had trouble getting along with others. He's quarreled with just about every commander he's been paired up with, from Ethan Allen all the way down to Gates. So after the Battle of Freeman's Farm, one evening, this is an interesting anecdote, Benedict Arnold and General Gates talked strategy over dinner. They couldn't stand each other. Arnold called Gates Granny Gates, not to his face, of course, but behind his back, because Gates wasn't super old, but he looked a lot older than he was, and he wore these spectacles, and he was kind of just, I guess, prematurely white-haired, and he was very cautious by nature, so the name seemed to fit. And the two generals, Arnold and Gates, they had two very different ideas for what to do next. Arnold, based on what I've told you so far, you will not be surprised to hear that Arnold wanted to attack. That was Benedict Arnold's answer to everything, attack. He wanted to attack Burgoyne, but Gates wanted to stay on the defensive. And they got into an argument about it. The argument turned heated, and Arnold exploded in fury. Gates banished Arnold to his quarters. He said, "Get out of here. You're relieved of command." So he doesn't make him leave, but basically he sends Benedict Arnold into timeout, Scott.
Go sit in the corner. Yeah.
And of course, we know that's Arnold is not going to go stand in the corner submissively and just say, "Okay, fine, I'll just stand here while everybody else is fighting." All right. On October 7th, Burgoyne sent a force of 1,500 toward the Americans on the Bemis Heights. Gates sent 2,400 to oppose him. So already we see the Americans are on high ground, and they've got more guys than the British. And then Benedict Arnold, in defiance of Gates, defying a direct order to not get involved and to just sit there, Arnold runs out. He takes charge of part of the battlefield without any authority. He just runs out there and takes command. Gates is back at headquarters. Arnold deployed riflemen in the trees, and they fought from cover. So there's those riflemen again. And Arnold starts shouting, "Victory or death." We heard that at the Battle of Trenton, which Arnold was not at, but he thought that was a great slogan. So it worked one time. Let's use it again. "Victory or death." And Arnold led a brave charge against the attacking British. Meanwhile, Morgan's riflemen picked off officers, including Lieutenant Colonel or Colonel Fraser. I can't remember. He may have been a brigadier. Actually, yeah, I think he was a brigadier general at this point. you tend to get promoted pretty quickly during war.
Hey everyone, Scott here. We're going to take a very short break for a word from our sponsors. There's a university in Canada named after him, so that's...
Is that right?
Yeah, so there you go.
I didn't know that. Okay, it's interesting. Fraser got killed, and after he was killed, the British attack really lost a lot of its steam, and they began to retreat. By the way, I got to mention a funny thing about Arnold. Arnold is running around during this attack, and he's going up to riflemen, and he's saying, "Hey, give me your rifle." Huh? Give me your rifle. Okay. And he would point it and shoot. So, I mean, he's just doing he's all over the place. He's shooting rifles. He's at certain points on a horse, swinging his sword. Arnold is just the dashing and daring, swashbuckling commander. But then he gets shot in the leg. And unfortunately for poor Arnold, it's in the exact same place where he had been wounded at Quebec. His femur was broken. Can you imagine how painful that would have been? Ugh. His horse fell, pinning him, but he was pinned between his horse and the ground, and so he had to have people come rescue him. But meanwhile, the British retreated in full. Burgoyne had bullet holes in his hat and coat, but he wasn't hit, fortunately for him. Burgoyne crossed back to the east side of the Hudson. They had been on the west side, but now they go back to the other side, and he begins to move north. But by this time, his army was starving. The food was pretty much gone. By October 11th, 300 of his men had deserted, 300 more. They just fled into the wilderness, and he just can't stop. He's hemorrhaging. I can't say it, Scott. Hemorrhaging men.
Yes.
They're just going by the hundreds. And so Gates, of course, Gates was the overall commander, and he got credit as the hero of Saratoga. But really, the victor was Arnold. Arnold really, I think, deserves to be given the title the hero of Saratoga. I mean, yes, Gates was an overall command, and the buck stops with him. You know, Gates was pushing the buttons. But if Gates had had his way, there would have been no brilliant, brave charge led by Arnold. Arnold would have been sitting in the corner. So, you know, it's a good thing for the Americans that Arnold didn't obey orders in this case. He was not going to take orders from some stupid granny.
Their actions in the battle, it really contrasts their personalities, because Arnold is out there doing practically everything. He's like the super fan in an NBA game who's standing up and trying to hustle the crowd to cheer more, doing everything. Gates never left his tent during the battle. What he did during it was he spent most of the day arguing the merits of the revolution with a captured aide of Burgoyne's in his tent. So he's having a philosophical discussion about the revolution while the battle is going on outside.
Yeah, that's a productive way to use your time.
But he gets a credit, so say what you will.
Okay, so on October 12th, Stark's army, there's John Stark, they had come in from where they had been before. Remember, they had defeated a German force at Bennington in what is now Vermont, but they had marched south, and they're coming in from behind the British. They had 1,000. They crossed the Hudson, and they got behind Burgoyne's force. So Burgoyne is basically surrounded now. He has nowhere to go, nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. So Burgoyne, he's not stupid. He may be a little bit foolish at times, but he sent a messenger to Gates, and they agreed to a ceasefire, and they negotiated for 2 days. 2 days. And there's an interesting story because I'm a little fuzzy on the details right now. I should have done my homework on this again. And by the way, I based a lot of my notes on a book called 1777. Not many people know about this book. There's another book that's very famous called 1776 by David McCullough. It tells the story of the New York campaign and the Battle of Trenton and Princeton. But 1777 is about Saratoga. And it's a very interesting book because it takes a day by day, even hour by hour approach. Like each chapter will say, for example, September 20th, 9 a.m., and then September 20th, 3 p.m., and then September 21st. So it's very detailed story. But listeners, if I get some of the details wrong in this story, forgive me. But there was the British Army. This is before they officially surrendered, but the British Army was just camped, waiting to see what was going to happen. And one of them jumps into the river, and he's going to take a little swim, if I remember the story correctly. And an American soldier on the other side of the river sees this British soldier, and they're both Irish, by the way. And the American looks down and he sees this British soldier of Irish origin, and he realizes it's his brother. So they're like, oh, okay, maybe I better not shoot him. I'm not going to shoot my brother. And so they had a little family reunion right there in the Hudson River. The Civil War, of course, the American Civil War is very famous for being a war of brothers, where literally you had brothers on each side fighting each other. But that's not all that common in the American Revolutionary War. But here it is. It's kind of a cool story where the two brothers are reunited on different sides. Anyway, pretty rare in the Revolutionary War. Finally, on October 17th, Burgoyne surrendered his army, which was down to 5,700 at this point. Burgoyne surrendered his sword, but Gates returned it. What a gentleman, aren't they? They're such gentlemen.
Gentleman Johnny.
Burgoyne offered a toast to George Washington. Well, that's pretty nice of a British guy to do. And Gates, in return, being very polite, offered one to George III.
All right. Well, I have to give it to Burgoyne because he has failed as a logistician. He's failed as a commander. But as we leave him behind, we're going to see him truly shine, because I think he's buttering up Gates and he's going to completely outfox him. So he knows how to weasel out of things, it seems like, is Burgoyne's superpower. And what he does is, when Gates accedes to nearly all of Burgoyne's demands, to articles of convention, not a surrender, are signed. So the officers and enlisted men lay down their arms, but by the terms of the convention, the troops weren't prisoners of war, and they're not subject to these rules. These articles of convention state that Burgoyne's troops can march out with the honors of war and lay down their arms on the command of their own officers. Then they'd march to Boston and sail to England on the condition of not serving again in North America unless properly exchanged. But what Gates didn't realize is that the troops could perform garrison duties elsewhere. And this could immediately free up a number of other British and German troops to take their place in America. Washington realizes this, and the convention becomes a matter of dispute. The upshot of the deal Burgoyne had engineered was that his troops, called the Convention Army, were marched to locations including Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and Charlottesville, Virginia, and parceled out to farmers as laborers to help compensate for the loss of Americans that were killed and couldn't bring in the harvest. So by the end of the war, most of the officers had been exchanged, and many enlisted men have been allowed to escape and settle on farms in Western Virginia and Pennsylvania. German and British desertions increase as the war goes on, and we see this in the Battle of Saratoga. Burgoyne almost is able to completely outfox Gates. In fact, he did, and if not for Washington, then the victory would not have meant that much in the long run. But they're able to correct it, and the troops are used as labor in that way. So,
yeah, old gentleman Johnny, man, you got to watch him every minute. Sneaky guy. All right, so this is a major thing. 5,700 British soldiers have surrendered, or whatever, close enough. Basically, they're out of the picture now. This great plan had to cut off New England and to take control of the Hudson Valley, hopefully rally the loyalists. It all goes to nothing. News of the surrender reached England around the end of the month, and the king was in despair. In the House of Lords, William Pitt, who used to be the prime minister, he said, this is Pitt the Elder, he said, "No man thinks more highly than I of the virtue and valor of British troops. I know they can achieve anything except impossibilities, and the conquest of English America is an impossibility. You cannot, I venture to say it, you cannot conquer America. What is your present situation there? We do not know the worst, but we know that in 3 campaigns we have accomplished nothing and have suffered much. Conquest is impossible." So even somebody like William Pitt, who was no spring chicken, he'd been the prime minister, or at least acting prime minister, I believe, during the French and Indian War. During part of it, he'd led the British to a victory over the French in the French and Indian War. So he knew what he was talking about. He knew what it was like to run a war. And he is starting to say, we need to just give it up. And he's not the only one. I just quoted him because he's probably the most famous. He's somebody that our listeners will know about. Lord North, the